welcome to another conversation on the Voice of the Marketeer, wherever you're watching or listening to this from. My guest today is tuning in from Bangalore and is somebody I've been extremely excited about bringing into the show for weeks now, and I've been chasing him for weeks basically. Meet Dhruva, who heads up Rocketium's global marketing function as Senior VP, where he's responsible for branding, demand generation, product marketing, and partnerships. Dhruva comes with basically about 2 decades of global experience in marketing and commercial roles across B2B SaaS, IT services, and software products. He excels as a growth stage marketeer, thriving on bringing new offerings to the market. Previously, he's also headed up go-to-market and product strategy for companies like Yahoo, ThoughtWorks, Vizury, the Zapr Media Labs, and Aditi. And so without further ado, I'm going to get straight into this. So Dhruva, thank you so much for making the time to speak with me today.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for having me. This is my podcast debut, so there could be some nerves, so bear with it. And hope this is useful for your audience, Nandita. That's a pleasure. Thank you for inviting.
Thanks, Dhruva. So to kick it off, I really want to pick your brain on marketing as a career path. Starting with this whole debate about being a strategist versus going into more of a marketing specialist route, let's say. And I know you're probably the best person to talk about it because I know, and you have a specific opinion on this. So why don't we get into it, and why don't you tell me what your take about this whole like specialist versus strategist choices are?
I can speak for myself. I can speak for what has worked for me and for people I know, my team members from the past, my colleagues, my peers. And one common pattern that I've seen is when you start, you want to just quickly go broad for a brief time and figure out what you have affinity towards. And then you could go deep into those streams, those areas, gain some form of mastery. And you need to spend a significant amount of time doing that. And while you go through those cycles is when you're ready to again broaden your horizons and you come back to more of a breadth kind of opportunity. And of course, based on what your ambitions are, the mix would vary. So to give you an example, my own career, it started to solve a demand gen problem in a mid-sized IT services company. While it was a mid-sized IT services company, we didn't really have a demand gen function, right? And the problem we wanted to solve was how can marketing contribute to revenue? And this was my very first role. And we had to start from scratch. And there was 100 different things we did through the first 6 to 8 months, starting from research to trying to understand what could potentially work, what we need to rule out. But while we did that, we figured out, 2 areas, and more specifically, one was email marketing and one to leverage the partner channel to do something like a virtual event or a webinar. And this, I'm talking about 2004, 2005, right? And this is very complex stuff then. We didn't even have the tool set to do this in automated ways, right? So, but the point is, both on email and running a partner channel with a webinar, we had to go so deep. We tried almost everything, right from figuring out the right draft to talking about personalization 20 years ago, and people are still talking about personalization, right? And even personalizing not just the body copy, personalizing the subject line, and there was not an automated way to do that then, right? So right from small things like that operationally to even getting tracking the metrics that mattered and going through multiple million iterations to get the right draft, right? To arrive at that $1 million draft that worked for us was what we pursued. And it was a good 2-year journey for just doing both these things, right? Both on email as well as webinars, we had to go so deep, right from tracking the most critical metrics, starting with simple things like open rate to what they clicked through, what were the positive responses, what were the negative responses, to actually, using technology that wasn't there in those times to personalize the subject line, and having 1 million iterations of the draft to finally arrive at that $1 million draft that gave us, responses and set up meetings for the sales team. And finally, marketing had something to do with revenue, right? And that was the aha moment for us. But the more important point I'm trying to make here is the fact that you go through these deep cycles when you pick these narrow areas which you have affinity towards or which interests you, makes you, adapt to the next challenge much better because you've been through this cycle, right? So what happened with me was the next challenge was on digital marketing, right? Where other things came along. There was product marketing that came, analyst relations that came in, but digital marketing, specifically PPC and SEO, were the next two things that I took. And I went deep on those two axes for 2 years, right? And then it so happened that the next 2 years I spent doing only messaging and nothing else, right? So if you look at this first 6 to 8 years, it was looking at these narrow pieces and going deep in it and gaining some form of expertise, some form of mastery where other people rely on you, other people look up to you to get guidance, to get mentorship, to get direction as to how to tackle those challenges they face, right? And I think once you arrive there, then you know that you can take on the next challenge, which could be slightly broader. And based on your ambition, you could take on a business problem, you could take on a marketing problem, a branding problem, whatever that comes your way, and tackle it with the same sort of DNA, right? And the ability to ask the right questions, the ability to tackle failure, the ability to adapt, all of these things is what helps you, grow and become a strategist is a very loaded word. I don't even want to say it, but become a leader, right? And I think take people along with you. I think that is important.
Maybe just taking a bit of a fast forward tap into your current role, Dhruva. So I think a lot of marketing careers today are reaching a sort of chasm at the manager slash director stage. So making it to a VP role or a CMO role is often met with a certain excuse that companies are only looking for people who've sort of been there, done that. And what I think of it is it's a bit of a chicken and egg problem. So I'm curious to get your take on this. How do you suggest going about landing that first VP slash CMO role if you've never been in that position before?
I think it boils down to two things, Nandita. I think when I look back at my career, even I've been stuck at those levels which you just mentioned, right? And how do you cross that chasm, right? I think you should look at the business as a whole and see what's important to it, and not what's important to your function, right? And that's when you come up with these two things. One is the ability to influence cross-team leaders, right? Ability to help them out, ability to inspire them. I think that is a people metric you need to drive on one. That's the first part. The second part is you should also influence a business metric, which is beyond what your function is responsible for, right? And it might not have a direct influence on it, but everything possible that you could do to help the sales team, everything possible that you could help the CRO with, right? I think those are the two factors. One, a people metric, and two, a business metric, which is beyond your function. And when you start to own that is, I think, when you cross that chasm.
In your personal experience, Dhruva, now, I mean, you've held leadership positions for many years, back to back even. Is there one particular perspective that has drastically shifted for you as a leader as you've sort of hopped around between all of these different roles?
I think once you realize that life doesn't stop at MQLs and SQLs, and there is life beyond that, I think that's a good realization to have. More often than not, on 2 or 3 occasions in my career, I've had this feeling where, hey, we're doing well, my team's doing great, they're hitting it out of the park. The business is sluggish though. So that can't be an excuse, is the point, right? It's related to what I mentioned earlier, where you need to be responsible for a people metric and a business metric, which is beyond your function. And that's what, once you realize that, and I myself realized that, where that life doesn't stop at SQL, there's life beyond. And I think that's when you realize, yeah.
Well said. And just maybe taking a little bit of a hard right at this point, I want to go into some of your core expertise. Just looking at the career graph you've had and the kind of companies you've been with, your sort of sweet spot, if I may, seems to be in the 1 to 10 million revenue bracket, right? Tell me, Dhruva, what sort of dynamics do you believe is what makes this sort of category exciting for you? but also generally for marketers out there? Like, why is this particular category so enticing and fascinating?
Speak for myself here. I think, see, I've spent the first decade of my career working with mid-sized to larger enterprises, and the second decade has been mostly with startups, right? Especially in the 1 to 10 million space. And one thing I have realized is, at a very personal level, I get that adrenaline rush when you are in a high experimental mode, right? Where you figure out things, where there is an unknown element and you need to do something, right, about it. And you need to find a solution fast. You are running against time. So these are the attributes that make it exciting to me. And if I had to break down this 1 to 10 journey, right, typically 0 to 1 is founder led, and some level of PMF is achieved, in some cases not achieved. But the 1 to 10 journey, there are three paths it can take, right? You never reach 10, you fail. You get there super fast, or you get there by dragging yourself, right? So there's not much you could do about 1, but about 2 and 3, life is very exciting in both scenarios, right? In 2, where you get there super fast, it's about getting there in the fastest, most effective way. Most effective is important here, because more often than not, in 1 to 10 journeys, you don't have the budgets that you would ideally like as a marketer, right? You hardly do anything ATL. It is mostly BTL and the obvious, right? So that's where it gets interesting. You try different things to see, hey, which is the fastest, most effective way, and that kind of gives me this adrenaline rush. It kind of helps me build teams who are also, have that appetite for it. Then you have the many journeys where 1 to 10 is sluggish, or you're still figuring out PMF because clear PMF hasn't been achieved, right? And that is again exciting, because then you're going beyond marketing. You're trying other things. You're trying, hey, what can we do with the proposition around the product? Can we do something else? Can we get some feedback from the market and incorporate that into the other parts of the org? And while that journey is slow, it's still very exciting because you're figuring things out, right? And the ability to figure things out and solve for it and get to 10 is a journey that I believe is very rewarding, because you are still at an early stage, right? What happens at 10 onwards, or 10 to 100, once you hit 10, you have reached a stage where the Series B investors are coming in, everyone else is coming in, and you at some level will get into a rinse repeat mode, at least to some portion of your business. And there is a portion which will always be what will get you to 10 to 100 faster, or so on and so forth. But rinse repeat, while is a skill that is required, and it is probably something that I don't enjoy as much, but as you scale up, that's what you need, right? You need people who are ops focused. You need people who are super efficient. You need people who just improve things by 0.1% every day, right? So yeah, I think that's the big distinction between the journeys for me. Personally, I don't know how 10 to 100 feels. I've been to 10 to 50 at best. So let's see this time around, maybe different.
Tell me, Dhruva, depending on the different stages of growth that you've seen some of these organizations at, and you worked through those different stages, are there some interesting lessons that you've sort of carried on with you in terms of what clearly works versus what doesn't?
Every organization is very different. The playbooks of yesterday are not relevant today. So you'll have to constantly reinvent, right? And there are some things, as I said just now, about rinse repeat, and there's always a component of that where there's a known element of a playbook, or known element of a product proposition, or of a market, which you just rinse and repeat, and that's an ideal place to be, right? But there is always a substantial portion where, especially in startups, and I'm talking about startups here, right, where you're dealing with unknowns every day. And that is why maybe I'm hard to catch. There's this other thing you kind of learn as well, where you do a lot of things as marketing teams in a boardroom. You come up with these fancy proposition and messaging decks, and you think, hey, this is going to change the world, and why would anyone say no to this, right? And then you go to the market, and you get to hear something totally different. Like I remember in one of my earlier companies, we had this entire platform pitch that we could go live super fast with 10 marketing channels, easy setup, so on and so forth. And it sounded like a dream, right? It sounded like the holy grail of marketing came true. But in fact, what the market came back to us with, they just wanted browser push notifications. I'm like, that's the most, the smallest thing in the mix. But that's what they wanted, and these are things you learn, right? I think that's why I said it's an unknown. While we think that, and I think being closer to the customer, I think is something for marketing teams. Is especially in B2B, right? I think this is not so much in other industries, whereas internet, FMCG, you're always close to the customer. For B2B, for some reason, I can't totally understand. I think we have always been in the boardroom and not gone out in the field and, I think not even get indirect feedback through sales. I think even that channel is broken, right? Forget directly talking to customers. But I think that's one pattern that will hold true across. As long as you're closer to the customer, that is one of the stakeholders that marketing definitely needs to own. And in the future, that relationship, see, because everything you do, right from your ads, right from your message, everything that you do is consumed by this customer, right? Or is for this customer. And you need to be empathetic towards this person, but you never talk to him. And I think one pattern I've seen across all B2B startups is marketing doesn't talk to customers. And if we could change that, that'll be brilliant.
Right. I do want to double tap on something you said just now, which is really how so much of this comes down to the teams, right? And the people that you're working with. And I know for a fact that you've built a lot of A-class marketing teams yourself, Dhruva, including at Rocketium at the moment. Tell me, what is the hardest part about being a marketing leader when you're trying to put an incredible team together?
The most difficult has been in the last few years finding the talent with the right set of motivations. Two things that have gotten really hard in the last 5 to 6 years have been, one, the talent pool with remote work kicking in has embraced the freelance culture more. So they're getting more transactional, to getting them to embrace a certain mission or a certain goal as their own and be part of this team. That's getting harder, right? I think that's one big problem. The second thing, what I've seen is with new tech, AI, and all of that coming in, the old playbooks are no longer relevant. So what do you look for in people has changed, right? So then we probably need to go back to that old way of hiring where you look at intrinsic properties in people that tell you, that indicate, hey, this person can get this thing done, and you need to rely on that. Just like an example of a good driver is not made up by how good his driving skills are or how well he changes the gears. Especially when you drive in a city, the skill that matters the most is your skill to predict what else can go wrong around you. And there, I think your ability to observe is the intrinsic property you look for. And I think it is looking for intrinsic characteristics like those, and they're not very easy to find, not easy to spot. And that's what's going to make hiring harder as we go along with these two changes coming in.
I think a lot of marketing leaders, irrespective of whether you're at a VP level, director, CMO level, is becoming accountable for business outcomes, like you previously talked about. And when you think about that, financial acumen and financial understanding is just as important. I think irrespective of the stage of the business, it is right. So tell me, in your experience, how have you gone about developing a more of a CFO perspective on the business that you were handling or you were responsible for at a certain point in time?
It's very important to understand what the responsibility or the KPIs of the CFO is, right? And it varies from company to company, from one situation to another, right? Whether it is what are they in charge of, what do they need to show, right? Because more often than not, say in a startup scenario, CFO is charged with keeping an eye on costs, and you are charged with getting more business, which means you will end up spending more. right? So that's where the conflict typically starts, right? So I think irrespective, I think just understanding each other's objectives, each other's KPIs, and trying to help each other out, I think is super important here, right? And I have benefited immensely by making CFOs my best friends in different companies because it makes these conversations that much more easier. And we also are able to adjust and compromise where needed. And that has helped us fast track a lot of initiatives which otherwise get stuck in this review and approval process where I need to bring in the CEO to get something going. But this solves for a lot of it. Just having that empathy towards the CFO. Yeah.
Interesting. So maybe just to underscore the whole CFO perspective itself, how would you then trickle it down to some critical financial metrics that you have been tracking beyond all of our usual KPIs in marketing?
Yeah, as I said, earlier in the podcast, we spoke about life doesn't stop at MQL and SQL. So beyond that, of course, there are the obvious business metrics such as ARR and churn, and these things that matter to SaaS businesses. But one metric which I think, especially in this 1 to 10 stage, which we speak about a lot at Rocketium, is also LTV to CAC ratio. I think this indicates at multiple levels how healthy the business is, how profitable it is, how quickly you're winning customers, what is the cost of acquiring customers. While CAC itself is hard to compute because CAC includes, which is the cost of acquisition, includes your media spend, includes the spend of sales resources, customer success, teams, pre-sales teams, all of that. So how do you factor all of these costs? Itself is complex, but you get it right, then I think it's a very important metric which tells you, how healthy the entire business is, how healthy your entire funnel is, rather. Right? I think that's a better description. And that in turn helps you analyze the funnel in ways that are very meaningful, right? It helps you analyze, hey, how quickly are my deals moving through, right? Where is it getting stuck? What is the velocity of the deals? When I say where is it getting stuck, are we disqualifying deals faster, right? Are we winning deals fast? These are the questions that you need answers to. And when you just look at metrics as is, you don't get into these conversations. You just look at your top funnel numbers, your mid funnel numbers, and your bottom funnel numbers and say, hey, this is the state of the world. But just having, I think, LTV to CAC ratio is certainly one of the numbers that helps you look at it in a very holistic manner.
And maybe just speaking of your currently as a senior VP at Rocketium, how are you balancing what I call short-term financial pressures? Because I'm sure you have pressures on a quarterly basis, maybe even monthly, depending on how rapidly you guys are scaling. How do you go about balancing those pressures that come top down with still keeping the eyes on the larger picture of brand building, brand equity, making sure the engine in marketing is still moving?
Yeah, I think let's take branding here, right? Because branding typically you can't quantify it easily. And that's why it makes it that much more complex when you have to keep a check on costs and your spends. So the way I've seen branding work, not just at Rocketium, but even in other companies in this 1 to 10 journey, is when we have kept brand activations or any kind of branding related activities closer to the proposition or closer to the product. By that, what I mean is, if I could come up with a branding activity that makes the data that is unique to your company that much more newsworthy, or that much more for example, in Zapr, we were a media tech company, and we had access to data, which is our own data, about what people watched on TV, right? And what they didn't. So just the ability to use that data and come up with an index which brands would value, right? Because they are the ones at the end of the day who advertise on TV, and turn that into a branding activity makes it that much more meaningful, makes it that much more easier to justify. To your earlier question, when you have this conversation with the CFO, it becomes that much more easier. With Rocketium, again, we are in the creative ops space, right? And creative automation space. And here we help designers and marketing teams right from an ideation stage of a creative to the time it goes live, right? And of course, the post live analytics and all of that. Just understanding, you know, from all our enterprise customers as to how they run their creative process and coming up with a state of creative ops report was a brand activity which everyone vouched for, right? Nobody asked questions on how much you're going to spend on it because it was so close to the product, it was so close to the proposition that it made sense that, hey, we built this company for this idea. This is just a branding idea, right? So it makes that conversation very easy with other stakeholders, with the CFO. And I've always seen the closer you keep it to the proposition, the closer you keep it to the product, the faster you can launch a brand activation for your company.
Okay. We're almost down to the time I had in mind, Dhruva. Any last thoughts that you want to leave people with as a wrap up?
Thank you, Nandita, for having me on the podcast. My first one, so it is good, but I just want to, close with these words that we addressed how things are changing, how technology, how playbooks are changing, and for us marketers, it's always going to be day one. So it's time to go deep again, go to the depths of things, figure things out, and create these new playbooks, and then expand on it. And hopefully that's a fruitful journey for all.